The throne room of the empire stretched for nearly a kilometer. Its walls were made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Emperor the Eternal sat upon his ancient seat, his 4 arms folded across his chest as he listened to the screaming voices of his advisors. They were afraid. He could smell their fear mixing with the recycled air of the palace. "The humans have destroyed our 7th fleet," Grand Admiral announced. His voice shook as he spoke. "They used weapons we have never seen before. Our shields meant nothing to them." Emperor said nothing. He simply stared at the holographic display floating before him. Red dots representing human warships were spreading across the map like a disease. In just 3 standard cycles, they had conquered 12 of his border worlds. His mighty empire, which had stood for 40,000 years, was crumbling like sand in a storm. "How is this possible?" asked Minister Vex, the oldest member of the council. "They were a primitive species just 200 years ago. They had not even left their own star system." "They learned," replied bitterly. "They learned faster than any species in recorded history. When we first made contact with them, we laughed at their simple rockets and basic technology. We ignored them. We thought they would destroy themselves with their wars and their pollution. But they survived. They always survive." Emperor finally spoke. His voice was deep and cold like the void between stars. "What do they want?" The room fell silent. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it. "Speak," the Emperor commanded. Admiral swallowed hard. "They want justice, my lord. They want revenge for what we did to their colony world of New Eden. They want revenge for the 3 million humans we killed when we tested our new biological weapon on their population." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. He remembered that day well. It had been a simple experiment. The humans were expanding too quickly, and his scientists wanted to test a new virus that could eliminate entire populations. New Eden had been the perfect target, a small colony far from human military protection. The virus had worked perfectly. Every man, woman, and child on that planet had died within days. The Emperor had not felt guilty about it. To him, humans were just another species. They were insects compared to the great civilization. Their deaths meant nothing. But he had been wrong, so terribly wrong. The humans had responded with a fury that shocked the entire galaxy. They united their scattered governments into a single military force. They poured every resource they had into weapons development. They studied technology with obsessive determination. And in just 50 years, they had built a war machine that was now tearing his empire apart. "There must be a way to stop them," Minister Vex pleaded. "We must find something they want, something we can offer in exchange for peace." "They do not want peace," the Emperor replied coldly. "They want me dead. They have made this very clear." He was right. The human government had issued a single demand. They wanted Emperor himself. They wanted him to face trial for crimes against humanity. They wanted him to answer for the deaths of 3 million innocent people. The Emperor would never agree to this. He was eternal. He had ruled for over 2,000 years. He would not bow before primitive apes who had only recently learned to travel between stars. But deep inside his ancient heart, fear was growing. Real fear. For the first time in his impossibly long life, he felt the cold touch of death approaching. "Leave me," he commanded. "All of you, I must think." The advisors fled the throne room like frightened animals. Only one remained. A thin female with scales the color of dried blood. She stepped from the shadows where she had been standing throughout the meeting. "You called for me, father?" Princess asked. Her voice carried no warmth, no love, only cold formality. Emperor looked at his daughter with something close to disgust. She was his greatest disappointment. Unlike her siblings, had been born with a defect. Her psychic abilities, which all royalty possessed, were completely absent. She could not read minds. She could not project thoughts. She could not manipulate emotions like every other member of the royal family. Among his 47 children, she was the only one without power, the only one who was ordinary. The emperor had rejected her from the moment she was born. He had stripped away her titles. He had forbidden her from attending royal functions. He had treated her as a servant rather than a princess. Had accepted all of this without complaint. She had grown up in the shadows of the palace, ignored and forgotten. She had educated herself using old databases that no one else wanted to access. She had learned 12 languages. She had studied history, science, philosophy, and art. She had become brilliant without anyone noticing. Now the emperor looked at her and saw something he had never seen before. He saw an opportunity. "The humans want something from us," he said slowly. "They want a gesture of good faith, something to prove that we are willing to negotiate." Said nothing, she simply waited. "I am going to offer you to them as a gift," the emperor continued. "A sign of peace, a symbol of our willingness to build a new relationship with their species." For a moment something flickered in his eyes. Pain perhaps, or maybe relief. It was impossible to tell. "You are giving me to the humans?" she asked. "Yes, you will go to there as my representative. You will live among them. You will serve whatever purpose they decide for you. In return, they may pause their advance long enough for us to rebuild our defenses." The emperor did not mention that this was a desperate gamble. He did not tell that his military advisors believed the humans would simply execute her and continue their war. He did not explain that he was sacrificing her because she was the only one of his children whose death would not matter to him. Understood all of this without being told. She had always been good at seeing the truth that others tried to hide. "When do I leave?" she asked simply. "Tomorrow. A transport has already been prepared. You will be delivered to the human fleet under a flag of truce." Bowed her head, not out of respect, but to hide the expression on her face. She had dreamed of leaving this place her entire life. She had dreamed of escaping her father's cruelty and finding a world where she might matter to someone. She had never imagined it would happen like this. The transport ship was small and old. It had been designed for cargo rather than passengers. The emperor had not bothered to provide anything comfortable for his daughter's final journey. He had simply thrown her into the ship like garbage being disposed of. Sat alone in the cargo hold, surrounded by crates of what the emperor called diplomatic gifts. These were actually weapons, hidden surveillance devices, and carefully designed viruses meant to infiltrate human computer systems. Her father had told her about these things. He had ordered her to help the spies already present on Earth to distribute them. She had agreed to do this. She had nodded and accepted her father's commands like the obedient failure he believed her to be. But as the transport ship approached the human fleet, made a decision. She opened each crate and systematically destroyed everything inside. She crushed the surveillance devices. She burned the data chips. She neutralized the viruses using knowledge she had gathered from years of secret study. By the time the ship docked with the human flagship, she had eliminated every threat her father had tried to sneak into human hands. She did not do this because she loved humans. She did not do it because she hated her father. She did it because for the first time in her life, she was free to make her own choice, and she chose not to be a weapon in someone else's war. The airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Bright white light flooded the cargo hold, shielded her eyes as figures moved toward her. The first human she ever saw up close was a woman. She was shorter than expected, with brown skin and dark hair pulled back from her face. She wore a simple military uniform without any decorations or medals. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, scanning with obvious suspicion. "I am Admiral Sarah," the woman said. Her voice was firm but not cruel. "And you are Princess of the Empire. Your father sent you to us as a gift." She said the word gift like it tasted bitter in her mouth. "Yes," replied, "he did." Admiral stared at her for a long moment. Something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, a recognition of what it meant to be used by powerful men. "Come with me," the Admiral finally said. "We have much to discuss." As followed the human woman through the corridors of the ship, she noticed something strange. The human soldiers they passed did not look at her with hatred. They did not curse at her or spit in her direction. Some of them actually nodded politely. This confused her deeply. Her father had killed millions of their people. She was the daughter of their greatest enemy. Why were they not treating her like a monster? She would soon learn that humans had a strange quality that no other species in the galaxy possessed. They could separate the sins of the father from the innocence of the child. They could see an individual as more than just their bloodline. This ability to judge people by their own actions rather than their ancestry was something they had never understood. It was also something that would change everything. Admiral led to a small conference room. Inside, a group of humans were waiting. They were scientists, diplomats, and military officers. All of them looked tired. All of them bore the weight of a war they had never wanted to fight. "Sit down, Princess," Admiral said, gesturing to a chair. Sat, she kept her back straight and her face calm. She had spent her whole life hiding her emotions from her father. She would do the same here. "Let us be honest with each other," the Admiral continued. "Your father sent you here hoping we would kill you. He believes your death will give him time to prepare a counterattack. He thinks we are savages who will murder an innocent woman just because of who her father is." Said nothing. This was exactly what she had suspected. "He is wrong," Admiral said firmly. "We are not going to execute you. We are not going to hurt you. And we are certainly not going to send your body back to him like some kind of trophy." "Then what will you do with me?" asked. The Admiral smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was genuine. "That depends entirely on you. We will offer you protection. We will give you a place to live. We will allow you to build a new life far from your father and his dying empire. What you do with that opportunity is your choice." Felt something crack inside her chest. Something that had been frozen for a very long time began to thaw. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you show kindness to the daughter of your enemy?" Admiral leaned forward. Her eyes held a fire that had never seen before. "Because we refuse to become monsters. Because punishing children for the crimes of their parents is exactly what your father did to us when he murdered innocent people on New Eden. We will not become him. We will never become him." In that moment, understood why the humans were winning this war. It was not just their weapons or their technology. It was something deeper, something that lived in their hearts. They had a moral code that they refused to break, no matter how much pain they suffered. They had principles that guided them even in their darkest hours. Her father had no such code. He had no principles. He only had power. And power, she was beginning to realize, was not enough. The war was far from over. Emperor was still alive. The military was still dangerous. Millions more would die before peace could be achieved. But something had changed. A small seed had been planted. In the heart of his rejected daughter, a new loyalty was beginning to grow. A loyalty not born from blood or duty, but from simple human kindness. And that seed would eventually grow into something the Emperor could never have imagined. Something that would shake the foundations of his empire and bring about a new era for the entire galaxy. But all of that was still to come. For now, simply sat in that small room, surrounded by former enemies who treated her with more respect than her own family ever had, and allowed herself to hope for the first time in her life. The future was uncertain. The war continued to rage across 1,000 star systems. Death and destruction spread like wildfire through the galaxy. But on one small human ship, a princess who had been thrown away like garbage was being offered something precious, something her father had never given her. She was being offered a chance. 3 months passed on Earth, had been given a small apartment in a city called Vancouver. It sat on the edge of a great ocean, surrounded by mountains that touched the clouds. Every morning she would wake to the sound of birds singing outside her window. Every evening she would watch the sun paint the sky in colors she had never seen on her. The humans did not treat her as a prisoner. They did not lock her door or assign guards to follow her movements. They simply asked her to check in with a government liaison once a week and to avoid discussing military matters with anyone. At first, she did not know what to do with this freedom. For 200 years, every moment of her life had been controlled by her father's court. She had never chosen what to eat or what to wear. She had never decided where to go or who to speak with. Now suddenly, she could do anything she wanted. She spent the first few weeks simply walking through the city. She visited parks where children played on strange metal structures. She explored markets where vendors sold fruit and vegetables she had never tasted before. She sat in cafes and watched humans go about their daily lives. Everything amazed her. The way parents held their children's hands while crossing the street, the way strangers smiled at each other and said hello, the way old people sat on benches feeding small flying creatures called pigeons. On her, public spaces had been cold and formal. Citizens walked with their eyes down, careful not to attract the attention of the royal psychics who monitored their thoughts for signs of disloyalty. Joy was a private thing, hidden behind closed doors where no one could see. Here on Earth, joy was everywhere. It burst from open windows in the form of music. It echoed through the streets in the sound of laughter. It shone from the faces of people who had nothing to fear from their own government. Began to understand that this was what her father truly feared about humans, not their weapons or their armies, but their freedom. The empire maintained control through psychic surveillance and constant fear. Humans had built a society on the opposite principle. They trusted each other. They believed in the goodness of their neighbors. They allowed people to think and speak and create without interference. This freedom made them unpredictable. It made them creative. It made them dangerous in ways that rigid military thinking could never anticipate. One afternoon, was walking through a university campus when she heard music coming from an open doorway. It was unlike anything she had ever heard before. Complex harmonies mixed with driving rhythms that made her body want to move in strange ways. She followed the sound to a large room filled with young humans. They were sitting in rows, watching a group of musicians perform on a raised platform. Stood at the back of the room, afraid to enter but unable to leave. A young man noticed her standing there. He had curly brown hair and glasses that made his eyes look larger than they were. He smiled and gestured for her to come inside. "It's a free concert," he said. "Anyone can watch. Here, take my seat. I've been sitting too long anyway." Hesitated. This was exactly the kind of social interaction she had avoided since arriving on Earth. She did not know the rules. She did not understand human customs. She was afraid of making a mistake that would reveal how strange and broken she truly was. But something in the young man's smile made her trust him. She took the offered seat and watched the performance. The music washed over her like warm water. It spoke of emotions she had been taught to suppress. Longing and hope and sadness and joy all mixed together in waves of sound that seemed to reach inside her chest and touch something precious. When the concert ended, realized she was crying. Not the quiet, hidden tears of her childhood, but real tears that ran openly down her face. The young man was still standing nearby. He saw her tears but did not look away in embarrassment like a would have done. "Beautiful, right?" he asked simply. He wrote that symphony 200 years ago when he was almost completely deaf. He could barely hear his own music, but he kept creating anyway." Wiped her eyes. "He made something beautiful even though he was broken," she said quietly. "He made something beautiful because he was broken," the young man replied. "Sometimes our wounds are what give us power." His name was. He was a graduate student studying astrophysics. He dreamed of traveling to other star systems someday, though he knew the war made this unlikely. Over the following weeks, became his first real friend. He did not care that she was a princess. He did not treat her as a symbol or a threat. He simply talked to her like she was a normal person. Through met other humans, scientists who were fascinated by her descriptions of alien worlds, artists who wanted to paint her portrait, cooks who delighted in watching her try Earth foods for the first time. Each interaction taught her something new about humanity. She learned that they valued honesty, even when the truth was painful. She learned that they respected effort as much as achievement. She learned that they believed every person deserved dignity, regardless of their birth or status. These values were revolutionary to her. In the Empire, only power mattered. A person's worth was measured by their psychic abilities, their political connections, their usefulness to the ruling class. Weakness was despised. Failure was punished. Compassion was considered a disease that weakened the strong. Humans were the opposite. They celebrated people who overcame obstacles. They admired those who helped others without expecting reward. They believed that every life had equal value, whether it belonged to an emperor or a street sweeper. Began to see why her father had made such a terrible mistake when he attacked New Eden. He had assumed humans would react like wood in the same situation. He had expected them to fragment into competing factions, each one trying to profit from the disaster. He had predicted that their grief would make them weak. Instead, their grief had united them. Their anger had given them strength. Their shared humanity had transformed them into a force that was now destroying his empire one system at a time. While discovered the beauty of human society, the war continued to rage across the stars. Emperor grew more desperate with each passing month. His fleets were being annihilated. His colonies were falling. His own people were beginning to whisper that perhaps the eternal emperor was not as immortal as they had believed. In his paranoia, he ordered the execution of 3 of his own admirals who he suspected of plotting against him. He imprisoned his second oldest son for questioning his military strategy. He executed anyone who mentioned the possibility of surrender or negotiation. The empire began to crumble not just from human attacks but from internal fear. Citizens were afraid to speak their thoughts. Soldiers were afraid to report honest assessments of the battlefield. Scientists were afraid to admit that human technology was advancing faster than they could counter it. This culture of terror, which had maintained power for 40,000 years, was now tearing the empire apart from the inside. News of her father's brutality reached through human news broadcasts. She watched reports of mass executions on worlds. She saw footage of refugee ships fleeing the empire and begging for asylum in human space. Each story cut her like a knife, not because she loved her father or mourned his failing empire, but because she knew those suffering people. She had grown up among them. They were victims of the same tyranny that had crushed her spirit throughout her childhood. One evening, Admiral Sarah came to visit in her apartment. The Admiral looked tired. She had aged visibly since their first meeting, the war taking its toll on her body and mind. "I need to ask you something," the Admiral said, "and I want you to answer honestly." Nodded. "Your father is losing this war. Everyone knows it. Even his own generals know it. But he refuses to surrender. He would rather see his entire empire burn than admit defeat." "This does not surprise me," replied. "My father values his pride more than the lives of his people. We estimate that another 2 years of fighting will result in 50 billion deaths," the Admiral continued. "And human combined. 50 billion people who could be saved if we found a way to end this war peacefully." Felt the weight of those numbers pressing down on her. 50 billion, an unimaginable number, more people than had lived on Earth throughout most of human history. "What are you asking me?" she said quietly. Admiral leaned forward. "I am asking if you would be willing to help us end this war, not through violence but through communication. We need someone who understands culture, someone who can speak to your father's people in a way that bypasses his propaganda, someone who can show them that there is another way. You want me to betray my own species? I want you to save your own species, the Admiral replied firmly. Your father is leading them to extinction. If this war continues at its current pace, the Empire will cease to exist within a decade. Not because we want to destroy it, but because your father would rather see it destroyed than allow anyone else to rule. Was silent for a long moment. She thought about her life in the palace. She thought about the fear and cruelty that had defined her existence. She thought about the ordinary citizens who were now dying by the millions because of her father's arrogance. Then she thought about the humans she had met over the past 3 months, with his passion for stars, the children playing in the parks, the strangers who smiled at her on the street. These people were not monsters. They were not the savage barbarians her father had described. They were simply people who wanted to live in peace. What would I need to do? She finally asked. Admiral pulled out a small data chip. We have been developing a broadcast system that can penetrate communication networks. If we can send a message directly to the citizens of the Empire, bypassing your father's sensors, we might be able to spark a movement for peace from within. My father will call me a traitor. He will order my execution. He already considers you disposable, the Admiral pointed out gently. He sent you to us expecting us to kill you. He has not asked about your welfare even once since you arrived. This truth hurt, but accepted it. She had always known her father did not love her. Hearing it stated so plainly only confirmed what she had understood since childhood. The message would need to come from you, Admiral continued. From Princess of the Empire. You are still technically a member of the royal family. Your voice carries weight that no human propaganda could match. Took the data chip. It was small and cold in her palm. Such a tiny thing to carry such enormous potential. I will do it, she said. Not because I hate my father, though I have every reason to. I will do it because the people of my empire deserve a chance to survive. They deserve a leader who values their lives more than his own pride. Admiral nodded slowly. Thank you, Princess. You may have just saved billions of lives. Do not call me Princess, replied. That title means nothing to me anymore. Just call me. Over the following weeks, worked with human communication experts to craft her message. It was not a call for surrender or betrayal. It was something more subtle and more powerful. She spoke directly to the citizens of the Empire. She described her experiences among humans. She explained that they were not monsters but people with families and dreams and fears just like everyone else. She revealed the truth about New Eden, how her father had murdered millions of innocent civilians to test a weapon, and how this crime had started a war that was now consuming everything. She did not tell them to rebel against the Emperor. She simply asked them to question what they had been told. She asked them to consider whether there might be another way forward. She asked them to value their own lives and the lives of their children more than the glory of an empire built on fear. The broadcast went out on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. It penetrated every corner of the communication network before imperial censors could block it. Billions of citizens heard their former princess speaking to them from human space. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Emperor declared a traitor and ordered her execution in. His propaganda machine attacked her character, claiming she had been brainwashed by human mind control technology. But seeds had been planted. Questions had been raised. In cities and villages across the empire, people began to whisper about the princess who had found something better among the enemy. They began to wonder if everything they had been told about humans was a lie. The war continued, but something had changed. Soldiers began surrendering in greater numbers. Colony worlds started negotiating with human forces instead of fighting to the death. The absolute loyalty that Emperor had always depended upon was cracking at the foundations. And in her small apartment on Earth, watched these developments with a mixture of hope and fear. She had set something in motion that could not be stopped. For better or worse, the galaxy would never be the same. The message had reached the stars. Now she could only wait to see what would grow from the seeds she had planted. Came to visit her that evening. He brought coffee and a small cake to celebrate the broadcast. "You did something incredible today," he said. "You probably saved more lives than anyone in history." Shook her head. "I just told the truth. The humans could have done the same thing." "No," replied firmly. "A human could never have reached them the way you did. You spoke their language. You understood their fears. You knew exactly what they needed to hear." He paused and looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "You know what the funny thing is? Your father rejected you because you did not have psychic powers. He thought you were defective, useless. But maybe your lack of psychic ability is exactly what made you special." "What do you mean?" "Psychics can read minds and manipulate emotions. They are used to controlling people through force. But you grew up without those powers. You had to learn to understand people through observation and empathy. You had to develop real emotional intelligence instead of just taking shortcuts through someone's brain." Smiled softly. "That made you better at communication than any psychic could ever be. Your father's greatest disappointment became humanity's greatest gift." Considered this for a long moment. She had spent her entire life believing she was broken, believing she was less than everyone around her. Now she was beginning to see that perhaps her difference had been a strength all along. The night was quiet. Somewhere across the galaxy, her father was probably screaming in rage. His empire was slipping through his fingers. His own people were beginning to doubt him. But felt only peace. For the first time in her life, she had used her voice for something that mattered. She had spoken truth to power. She had offered hope to those who had none. Whatever happened next, she knew she had made the right choice. She had finally found a purpose worth living for. And she had humans to thank for showing her the way. The revolution began not with weapons but with words. Its message had spread across the empire like wildfire, jumping from world to world, passing from citizen to citizen in whispers and hidden data chips. The truth about New Eden could not be contained. On the industrial world of Prime, factory workers refused to build weapons for the Imperial fleet. They simply stopped working and demanded answers about the war. When military police tried to force them back to the assembly lines, the soldiers themselves joined the strike. On the agricultural moon of, farmers blocked supply shipments to Imperial military bases. They declared that their crops would feed hungry citizens, not armies fighting a war started by the Emperor's cruelty. On a dozen core worlds, protests erupted in the streets. Citizens who had never questioned the Empire in their lives suddenly found the courage to speak out. They carried signs with face and chanted slogans demanding peace. Emperor responded with brutal force. He ordered his loyal psychics to crush the protests through mental attacks. He sent his elite guard to arrest anyone who had shared his daughter's message. He executed thousands of citizens in public displays meant to terrify the population into obedience. But for every protester he killed, 10 more took their place. The fear that had controlled his subjects for 40,000 years was evaporating like morning dew. They had seen an alternative. They had heard the truth. They could not unsee it. The Emperor's own family began to turn against him. His eldest son, Crown Prince, quietly contacted human diplomatic channels to discuss possible surrender terms. His third wife, Empress, fled the palace with her children and sought asylum on a neutral world. Within 6 months of broadcast, the Empire was in civil war. Imperial forces loyal to the Emperor fought against rebel factions demanding his removal. Human fleets paused their advance, allowing the internal conflict to weaken their enemy without further human bloodshed. Watched all of this from Earth with mixed emotions. She had never wanted civil war. She had never wanted more death. But she understood that sometimes old systems had to break before new ones could grow. Admiral visited her regularly during this period. The admiral had become something like a mentor too, guiding her through the complex world of galactic politics. "The rebel factions have reached out to us," reported one evening. "They want to negotiate. They are offering to surrender all Imperial territory in exchange for amnesty and humanitarian aid." "What about my father?" asked. His expression darkened. "They want to hand him over to us for trial, as do the people of New Eden's surviving family members. They want justice." Justice, such a simple word for such a complicated concept, had spent many sleepless nights thinking about what justice meant in this situation. Her father had ordered the deaths of 3 million innocent people. He had started a war that killed billions more. He had ruled through terror and cruelty for 2,000 years. Did he deserve to die for his crimes? Did he deserve to suffer the way his victims had suffered? Did not know the answer. She only knew that her father was her father, despite everything he had done to her. Some small part of her still remembered being a child in the palace, watching him from a distance and wishing he would notice her. "What will happen to him if he is captured?" she asked quietly. "He will face trial before a tribunal. Representatives from every species affected by his actions will hear the evidence and decide his fate. It will be fair, it will be thorough, and it will be public." "Will I have to testify?" Nodded slowly. "Your testimony could be very important. You grew up in his palace. You saw how he operated. You understand his motivations better than almost anyone alive." Closed her eyes. She had hoped to never see her father again. She had hoped to build a new life far from the shadow of his cruelty. But she knew she could not hide forever. Some responsibilities could not be avoided. "I will testify," she said. "If it helps bring closure to the families of his victims, I will tell them everything I know." The final battle came 3 months later. Emperor had retreated to the Imperial of Prime with the remnants of his loyal forces. He had activated ancient defensive systems that dated back to the founding of the Empire. He had surrounded himself with his most fanatical followers and sworn to fight to the death. Human and rebel forces surrounded the planet. They offered surrender terms, complete amnesty for all soldiers who laid down their weapons, guaranteed safety for all civilians. The only requirement was handing over Emperor to face justice. The Emperor refused. In a system-wide broadcast, he declared that he would destroy Prime itself rather than allow aliens to set foot on sacred soil. He revealed that he had planted antimatter charges throughout the planet's crust. If any force attempted to land, he would detonate them and kill the 8 billion people who lived on the surface. The threat was real. Imperial sensors confirmed the presence of the charges. The Emperor had turned his own into a hostage. Admiral called an emergency meeting. Human and rebel commanders debated their options through a secure channel. Every plan they considered ended with billions of deaths. Listen to these discussions with growing desperation. Her father had finally lost all sanity. He was willing to murder his entire species rather than admit defeat. He would burn the galaxy to ashes if it meant dying on his own terms. Then she had an idea, a terrible, dangerous idea that might work or might get her killed. "Let me talk to him," she said suddenly. The room fell silent. Every commander, human and alike, stared at her in disbelief. "He will not listen to you," Admiral said gently. "He declared you a traitor. He wants you dead." "I know, but I am still his daughter. I am still the child he threw away because he thought I was worthless. Maybe that is exactly why he will listen." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My father is a proud man. His entire identity is built on being superior to everyone around him. He cannot surrender to humans because that would mean admitting that lesser beings defeated him. But maybe he could surrender to me." One of the rebel commanders leaned forward. "Explain." "Let me go to the surface alone. Let me offer him a deal. He surrenders personally to his daughter, the failure, the reject, the nothing. His pride is hurt but not destroyed because he is not bowing to aliens. He is simply accepting defeat from his own bloodline. That is insane, said. He will kill you the moment you land. Perhaps, but he might not. My father always enjoyed irony. The idea of surrendering to the daughter he rejected might actually appeal to his twisted sense of humor. The debate continued for hours. Some commanders thought the plan was brilliant. Others thought it was suicide dressed up as strategy. Eventually, they reached a compromise. Would be allowed to attempt communication with her father, but she would not go to the surface until they had some indication he was willing to talk. The message was sent. Princess of the Empire requested a personal audience with Emperor. She offered to come alone, unarmed, with no recording devices or weapons. She asked only for a chance to speak with him face to face. The response came 6 hours later. The Emperor agreed to meet. The shuttle landed on a platform outside the Imperial Palace. The building looked ancient and tired, its living crystal walls flickering with irregular light. Smoke rose from several districts of the capital city, where riots had broken out despite the Emperor's threats. Stepped out of the shuttle and breathed air for the first time in over a year. It tasted like home. It tasted like pain. Her father was waiting for her in the throne room. He sat on his ancient seat just as she remembered, his 4 arms folded across his chest. But he looked different now. Older, smaller. The confidence that had always radiated from him was gone, replaced by something desperate and hollow. "So," he said as she approached, "my worthless daughter returns. I should have killed you myself instead of sending you to the humans." "Probably," agreed. "But you did not. You made a mistake. You thought humans would destroy me, but instead they saved me." The Emperor laughed bitterly. "Saved you. They brainwashed you. They turned you into their weapon. Everything you have done, you did for them." "I did it for myself," replied calmly. "For the first time in my life, I made my own choices. I decided what I believed was right. I acted on my own conscience instead of following orders from someone who despised me." She stepped closer to the throne. Her father did not move, but his eyes tracked her carefully. "Do you know what the humans taught me, Father? They taught me that weakness can become strength. They taught me that the qualities you rejected were actually gifts. My inability to read minds forced me to develop genuine empathy. My lack of psychic power made me work harder to understand people through observation and patience." "Pretty words," the Emperor spat. "They mean nothing." "They mean everything. You built an empire on psychic domination. You controlled your subjects through fear and mental surveillance. But humans cannot be controlled that way. Their minds are naturally resistant to our powers. So when you attacked them, you had no idea how to fight them. Your entire strategy was based on abilities that did not work." Gestured at the flickering walls around them. "Look at what your empire has become, crumbling, dying. Your own people have turned against you, not because the humans made them, but because they finally saw the truth about who you really are." Emperor rose from his throne. Despite his diminished appearance, he was still tall and imposing. He towered over like a mountain of ancient malice. "I should kill you right now," he whispered. "I should tear you apart with my bare hands." "You could try," said quietly, "but you will not." "Why?" "Because deep down, you know I am right. You know your empire was built on a foundation of cruelty that could not last forever. You know the humans are not inferior beings, but worthy adversaries who defeated you fairly. And you know that killing me now would not change any of that." She reached out and touched her father's arm. It was the first time she had touched him since she was a small child. His skin was cold and dry like old paper. "You have a choice, Father. You can detonate those charges and kill 8 billion people, including yourself. You can go down in history as the greatest monster the galaxy has ever known, or you can surrender with dignity. You can face trial for your crimes. You can show the universe that even Emperor the Eternal was capable of one selfless act." Tears began to fall from her eyes. She did not try to hide them. Please, Father, for once in your life, choose mercy over pride. Choose life over death. Choose to be remembered as something more than a destroyer. Emperor stared at his daughter for a long moment. Something shifted in his ancient eyes. Something that might have been regret or sorrow or simply exhaustion. They will execute me, he said finally. Maybe, but maybe not. Humans believe in justice, not revenge. They will give you a fair trial. They will consider your circumstances. And whatever sentence they decide, it will be based on law rather than hatred. The emperor looked around his crumbling throne room. He looked at the flickering lights and the smoke rising from his burning capital. He looked at the daughter he had rejected and saw something he had never noticed before. He saw strength, real strength, not the power to dominate minds or command armies, but the courage to stand before a monster and speak the truth. I made a mistake with you, he said quietly, perhaps my only regret. Then Emperor the Eternal, ruler of the empire for over 2,000 years, slowly lowered himself to his knees before his worthless daughter. I surrender, he said. The war ended that day. Emperor was taken into custody without resistance. The antimatter charges were safely deactivated. 8 billion lives were saved because one rejected princess had the courage to face her greatest fear. The trial lasted for 6 months. Witnesses from across the galaxy about the Emperor's crimes. Evidence was presented. Arguments were made. The entire process was broadcast to every inhabited world so that everyone could see justice being done. On 3 separate occasions, she described her childhood in the palace. She explained how her father's cruelty had shaped her understanding of power and fear. She revealed secrets about imperial operations that she had pieced together through years of careful observation. But when asked if she wanted her father executed, she surprised everyone. No, she said. I want him to live. I want him to spend the rest of his long life watching the galaxy rebuild without him. I want him to see humans and working together. I want him to understand that everything he believed was wrong. The tribunal sentenced Emperor to life imprisonment on a remote station far from any inhabited world. He would live in comfort but complete isolation, able to observe galactic events but never participate in them again. Some thought the sentence was too lenient, others thought it was exactly right. Either way, it was done. The war was over. The healing could begin. In the years that followed, became one of the most important figures in galactic history. She served as a bridge between human and societies, helping to negotiate treaties and establish cultural exchange programs. She gave speeches at universities across a dozen worlds, teaching young people about the dangers of prejudice and the power of empathy. Remained by her side through all of it. They married in a small ceremony on a beach in Vancouver, surrounded by friends from both species. It was the first official human union, a symbol of the new era dawning across the stars. When asked about her legacy, always said the same thing. She had not done anything special. She had simply been shown kindness when she expected cruelty. She had been given a chance when she expected death, and she had tried to pass that gift forward to others. The humans had saved her life by treating her as a person rather than a symbol. They had taught her that every individual had value, regardless of their origins or abilities. They had demonstrated that mercy was not weakness but strength. These lessons had changed everything, not just but for the entire galaxy. Centuries later, historians would debate the turning point of the war. Some said it was the development of human weapons technology. Others pointed to specific battles or political decisions. But most agreed that the real turning point was something simpler. It was the moment when Admiral Sarah chose to treat a rejected princess with basic human dignity. It was the decision to offer shelter instead of execution, compassion instead of revenge. That small act of kindness had started a chain reaction that ended an empire, saved billions of lives, and created a new era of peace between species who had been enemies for generations. The humans had many weapons. They had advanced technology and brilliant military commanders, but their greatest weapon was something that could not be measured or manufactured. It was their ability to see the good in others, their refusal to become monsters even when fighting monsters, their stubborn belief that every person deserved a chance to prove themselves. Emperor had sent his daughter to the humans hoping they would destroy her. Instead, they had transformed her into the instrument of his downfall. He had thought he was sacrificing a worthless reject. He was actually giving humanity their greatest gift. And that gift had changed the fate of worlds. In her final years, often sat by the ocean and watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that still amazed her after all that time. She would think about her journey from rejected princess to galactic peacemaker. She would remember the fear and pain and loneliness of her childhood. But mostly she would think about the humans who had shown her another way. Admiral, who had offered her protection when she expected death, who had shown her that love could cross any boundary. The countless ordinary people who had smiled at her on the street and made her feel welcome in a strange new world. They had seen something in her that she could not see in herself. They had believed in her when no one else did, and because of that belief, she had found the strength to change everything. This was the true power of humanity, not their weapons or their technology, but their hearts, their endless capacity for hope and kindness and second chances. They were not the most advanced species in the galaxy. They were not the strongest or the oldest, but they were something more important. They were good. And that goodness had saved them all.